Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today I'm taking a quick look at the Gigabyte MO27Q28GR, the brand new glossy version of the much loved MO27Q28G that we looked at last year. This new version debuted at CES 2026 and is set to be very similar to the non-R version. The only major thing Gigabyte have changed here is switching the matte screen coating to a glossy screen coating, but I have fully tested the screen just to make sure that's the only difference. Deploying a glossy version of this monitor is the result of user feedback. A lot of you guys seem to prefer the glossy finish on OLED monitors, and Gigabyte have heard that message loud and clear. LG Display, who make the tandem WOLED panel used in these monitors, offer both a matte and glossy version of the 27-inch 1440p 280Hz panel. Gigabyte are simply providing both of these options to you in an otherwise identical package. There's nothing custom here, it's the official LG Display options. Asus, for example, they use the glossy panel in their XG27AQ and don't offer a matte version at all. It's important to note this because each brand likes to put their spin on things. Gigabyte have branded the glossy finish as Real Black Glossy, while Asus use True Black Glossy on their model. These are just marketing terms that refer to the same glossy panel implementation from LG Display. There's no difference between Real Black and True Black Glossy, so the glossy Asus and Gigabyte models look the same. With Gigabyte giving you the choice between glossy and matte at the same price, the decision here comes down entirely to personal preference. There's no right or wrong answer here, and I generally think it depends on your setup as to which coating is better. Matte tends to be the optimal choice in brighter environments or rooms where you have less control over how much direct light hits the display. Glossy tends to be better in dimmer environments or rooms where you can control lighting to give you the optimal experience. To expand a bit on this, the main advantage the glossy finish has is that it doesn't diffuse light that hits the front of the panel. At certain angles, this means that instead of incoming environmental light spreading out and hurting clarity, you get an isolated reflection and minimal impact elsewhere. This can help to preserve black levels and perceived depth. It comes at a cost though. As the panel cannot diffuse light, the screen has a mirror finish that's prone to direct reflections. The layer structure does a decent job of minimizing these reflections, so they're not terribly distracting, but anything bright is quite visibly reflected, especially when viewing darker content. The other advantage is a lack of coating grain. The way matte panels work is they add grain to the surface to diffuse incoming light. This hurts sharpness and clarity because it's also slightly diffusing the light the OLED panel is emitting. It's not an overly noticeable flaw in a lot of cases, but if you look closely, glossy panels are sharper, especially viewing text. If you can handle reflections, or if you can position the screen in a way to minimize reflections, I think the glossy screen coating looks better. The type of glossy you get with these tandem WOLEDs in particular is excellent, and you really do get deep blacks even in moderately lit rooms. You can see why Gigabyte and Asus use marketing terms like Real Black and True Black to describe this finish. Matte coatings do have advantages in some situations though. The way they diffuse light eliminates the mirror finish and significantly reduces the visibility of reflections. Yes, it does this by spreading out light that hits the surface, but it's a great way to remove annoying distractions. Mirror finishes can be especially problematic when you have light sources directly opposite the monitor, like if you have to use the display near a window during the day. Matte coatings deal with direct lighting much better. So if you have a particularly bright room or if you find reflections extremely distracting, matte is the way to go. And like I said, Gigabyte are now offering you the choice. If you want matte, get the MO27Q28G. If you want glossy, get the MO27Q28GR. Previously, you'd have to opt for a completely different monitor from a different brand, in this case Asus, to get glossy, so it's good to see that choice expanding to more options. Obviously, the main difference between the two Gigabyte variants is the screen coating, but are there any other differences? Well, back at CES, Gigabyte were talking about a new HDR feature called Hypernits, but this is not exclusive to the GR model. With the latest firmware version F07 from February 2026, Hypernits is also available on the matte G model as well. Basically, it boosts brightness and saturation in some HDR scenes, but because it isn't a super accurate configuration, I don't have much interest in testing it further. In terms of general HDR performance, the MO27Q28G and GR offer a very similar experience when it comes to accuracy and EOTF tracking. The available HDR modes are the same, and performance is virtually identical in these modes. My preferred configuration here is still the mode labeled HDR, with the APL stabilize setting adjusted to high. This offers the highest brightness without sacrificing too much from accuracy. While performance is good on both the G and GR models, Unfortunately, because tuning is the same, some of the weaknesses of the matte model have carried over to the newer glossy version. This includes some over-brightening in dark scenes for elements that are meant to be above 80 nits in luminance, which causes this bump in the EOTF chart. This isn't panel dimming or panel brightening on the level of QD-OLEDs, but it's less than perfect. In SDR accuracy, I found the older matte version to be a little bit more accurate than the glossy version. Here we're looking at the sRGB modes, and while the glossy version has excellent white balance and good Rec. 709 gamut emulation, gamma is definitely worse and leads to an inferior delta E. The matte version sets quite a high bar here, as I'd say that model has above average calibration, whereas the glossy version is just plain old average, though still very usable. The biggest difference that I saw is in brightness. My matte model is a little brighter than my glossy model across both SDR and HDR content. In SDR, after calibration I recorded 325 nits on the GR, whereas the G gets up to 368 nits, which is 13% higher. This is probably due to panel variance and small tuning tweaks, but this difference is larger than I'd normally expect comparing two monitors with essentially the same panel hardware, save for the screen coating. Across HDR content, the matte version was again up to 13% brighter in some synthetic tests, hitting 1500 nits instead of 1300 nits. At a 10% window size, the matte version was 10% brighter. And then in our real scene tests, the matte version was 17% brighter using a geomean across the tests, which is certainly outside normal panel variance. My MO27Q28G unit has definitely been the brightest tandem W OLED I've tested so far, and brighter than I've seen other people get in their reviews, so I'm not sure what conclusion to draw here. Have I just gotten a brighter than average matte version and a below average glossy version, or have Gigabyte tweaked anything? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter too much. My MO27Q28GR produces similar brightness to my XG27AQWMG, which is ASUS's implementation of the same glossy panel. Some of the brightness differences I've recorded aren't significant either. A 13% brighter screen in SDR content is not a game changer, for example, but ideally, the glossy version would be as bright as the matte version, especially in real scene HDR content. Outside of these things, everything else is the same between the MO27Q28G and MO27Q28GR, so it's worth going back to my review of the matte version to get more details. Motion performance is identical, as they're both 280Hz monitors. Input lag is the same, the design and build quality is the same, port selection is also the same. One thing I'm sure a lot of people will be wondering is whether the MO27Q28GR suffers from uniformity issues in dark grey content, the dreaded grey banding issue. This problem is an inherent flaw with tandem WOLED panels, so all units will have some form of grey banding, whether you get the glossy GR model, the matte G model, or other displays using this panel. However, the level to which you experience this issue does seem to vary a lot from unit to unit. Some models are really bad, others are better, and some people have had success reducing grey banding after running a few panel compensation cycles. I don't like how this issue is a panel lottery, that in the worst cases will require several RMAs to get a good unit. LG Display need to tighten up quality control, so this isn't required. I'd much prefer buyers could just grab a tandem W OLED and use it in peace without having to worry about banding. Unfortunately, the reality is that when buying an MO27Q28GR, you might get one with particularly prominent grey banding. However, if you're wondering about my specific unit, I didn't see too much grey banding, and the results I'm showing on screen here are after 70 hours of use with 7 pixel clean cycles having been run automatically. I've tried to capture a photo of this unit's grey banding using exposure that matches real life, so this is basically what my screen looks like. My unit is very usable, all things considered. There are some dark grey uniformity problems. This is not a perfect result on the level of a QD OLED, but it's decent and not problematic while gaming, even in dark HDR scenes. Hopefully this is what most units look like. So that's everything I've found testing the Gigabyte MO27Q28GR. This model has just launched and is available for $600 US, the exact same price as the matte version. If you set on the Gigabyte model as opposed to other tandem W OLED options, the two variants having the same price means you can really just pick whichever coating you like. You don't have to factor price into the equation, just base the decision on the coating. There were a few differences in accuracy and brightness that I found in my testing, but I didn't see anything that would stop me from recommending the glossy version and instead recommend the matte version. In fact, for most people, I'd go the other way and recommend the glossy version. I personally prefer the glossy finish. I think for most people, it will offer the better experience. So if you are going to buy the Gigabyte model, probably go glossy. It's great that you get a choice though. We rarely see companies offering basically the same product with different coatings, so kudos to Gigabyte for listening to user feedback and providing both options. Now, this isn't to say the MO27Q28GR is the best overall 1440p tandem WOLED monitor. In fact, I'm currently working on a roundup that should be on the channel shortly that will look at all the options from Gigabyte, Asus and LG in more depth, so stay tuned for that. But haven't quite finished all the testing for that, so I just wanted to give a quick preview today of the Glossy Gigabyte model and how it differs from the matte version that I already tested, especially because you can purchase it now. So anyway, that's it for this one. As I said, stay tuned for that roundup. That'll be on the channel shortly. If you do want to support Monitors Unboxing, the independent testing that we do, we have Patreon. Links to those in the description below. If you sign up, you get access to some pretty cool benefits. We have our ICC profiles and calibrated settings for all of the monitors that we test. We've got monthly live streams, Discord chat, plenty of other good stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.